Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're cutting through the headlines about the global gender pay gap to focus on something. Well, a much more specific and I think deeply personal career dilemma. We aren't just looking at the broad economic reality of gender wage discrimination, which is, a huge human rights issue the UN talks about. We're analyzing how that experience forces highly skilled women to make some really hard choices.
Exactly. About their next employer.
Right.
For this deep dive, we really moved past the usual kind of aggregate statistics. The core question we're examining is much more targeted. If a high-performing female professional discovers she's been systematically underpaid by a local domestic company, where does she go?
Where does she turn for her next job?
Precisely. Does that painful experience push her directly toward a foreign multinational company or an MNC? And if it does, why?
To answer that, we sourced a remarkably focused piece of research. It's an extensive study, and it gives us this really rare opportunity to see the labor market responding in real time to unfairness.
Yeah, our primary source tracks the career movements of 165,624 female professionals and managers.
Wow.
These are all women who changed jobs in Denmark over a 13-year period from 2002 to 2015. So the mission here is sharp. Can we quantify if that negative experience of wage discrimination turns what's usually a drawback for foreign firms
into a huge recruiting advantage?
Exactly.
And that drawback is so key. I mean, we often hear about the liability of foreignness, right?
Right.
Foreign companies are the outsiders. They can struggle with legitimacy. They're less familiar to the local workforce. They're just not as integrated.
That's the starting line. But the premise this research tested, and the mission we're on today, is really to understand how that liability flips. When the local environment, the domestic labor market, is rife with discrimination against a specific talent pool,
then the outsider status of the MNC can suddenly signal something totally different.
Safety, fairness, opportunity. It transforms that foreignness from a liability into a highly strategic asset for attracting top female talent.
Okay, before we dive into the findings, we have to slow down for a second and clarify what we even mean by gender wage discrimination, because this can get technical.
It's absolutely critical to make this distinction. When you hear reports about the raw gender pay gap, let's say it's 15% or 20%, that gap accounts for, well, everything.
Like differences in skill, education, hours worked?
All of it. Experience, whether a woman chose a lower paying sector. The raw gap is interesting, but it doesn't isolate the actual unfairness.
So if the raw gap is a combination of choices and discrimination, how does the research pull those two things apart?
The researchers use a really rigorous econometric method. It's called the Kitagawa-Oaxaca blinder decomposition.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is, but the concept is actually pretty simple. They account for every measurable characteristic you can think of: education, tenure, firm size, industry, and they calculate the wages based on those things.
And then what?
They compare the actual wage a woman is paid to the predicted wage. So if a woman is paid, say, $6, but based on all her measurable qualifications, she should be paid dollars.
And Y is a lot higher.
And Y is significantly higher than the difference that cannot be explained by skill or choice or education. That's what they isolate.
So if I have the exact same experience, education, and role as a male colleague, but I'm paid 5% less, and there's no observable factor to explain that 5%, that's the residual. That's the discrimination.
Precisely. That unexplained residual is the researchers' definition of gender wage discrimination. And by using this method, they isolate it for each individual woman in the data set, which is what's so powerful here.
And Denmark is a really interesting setting for this, isn't it? We tend to think of Nordic countries as having, solved these issues.
It's fascinating because it's such a fluid labor market. They call it a flex security model. People change jobs really easily and often, so you can cleanly see their preferences when they move.
But the pay gap was still there.
Oh, yeah. Despite its progressive reputation, the gap was still significant, around 14% recently. And crucially, the research leverages a 2006 Danish pay transparency law.
So that made it easier to see the discrimination.
Exactly. It mandated wage disclosure to employee reps so that transparency acted as a catalyst for women to realize they were underpaid and, well, look for an exit.
So we have these highly mobile professional women who now have a tool to confirm they're being treated unfairly by local norms. Which brings us to job matching theory. What are they looking for?
Well, job matching theory just says that people try to find the best fit based on the information they have. And normally, the best fit is a familiar domestic employer.
But not in this case.
Not if those local norms, those really deeply rooted social beliefs, systematically hurt women's pay. Then the foreignness of an MNC starts to signal an escape. It signals a deviation from the very norms that are hurting them.
The intuition there is so strong. If
Yeah.
the local ecosystem is broken, you look outside the ecosystem. So let's get to the core finding. The data confirms this. What did Hypothesis 1 tell us?
Hypothesis 1 was pretty direct. It stated that as the measured gender wage discrimination among a woman's domestic peers increased, she was significantly more likely to match with a foreign MNC subsidiary when she changed jobs.
And the data back that up.
Strongly. The individual experience of being underpaid was a direct predictor of a flight into the multinational sector.
So why do MNCs become this safe harbor? I mean, they're outsiders, yet suddenly they're trusted more than the local players.
The mechanism is that MNCs are seen as social deviants in this context. They're structurally positioned to risk nonconformity with host country norms in order to get what is essentially undervalued human capital.
It's like a strategic talent arbitrage.
That's a perfect way to put it. They see a talent pool that the local market is systematically underpricing, and they just seize that opportunity.
But how does being foreign actually allow them to do that, to bypass that local bias?
There are two main clear rationales. The first one is governance. MNCs are just generally much more likely to follow standardized, formal, company-wide pay policies globally.
So the rules are the same everywhere.
Right. These policies are designed to be applied consistently across borders, which structurally limits the opportunity for local cultural bias to seep into the wage-setting process.
So the HR guidelines from, say, New York or Frankfurt just automatically override the unconscious bias that might be happening in a Danish regional office.
Exactly. The local manager just has less leeway to apply their own biases. And the second rationale is reputational risk.
Of course.
MNCs are highly sensitive to their global reputation. They worry about negative PR from discrimination, especially when they're operating in these developed, politically sensitive markets. That sensitivity pushes them to ensure fair practices.
Often putting them a step ahead of local firms who might feel less of that global scrutiny.
A step ahead, exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the payoff. For the women who made this move, this wasn't just about feeling better. It was a clear economic win.
Oh, it was substantial. The quantitative results showed that the women who successfully matched with an MNC subsidiary earned an average hourly wage of 128 DKK.
And if they went to another domestic firm?
That average dropped to 115 DKK.
So that's an 11.3% salary premium. That is massive. It's a huge immediate correction.
It's a significant economic opportunity gained just by switching employers. But the qualitative interviews, that's what really brought this to life. It showed it wasn't just about data points. It was deeply felt frustration.
Yeah.
Women described realizing their unfair pay and finding it, in their words, utterly annoying. They weren't just looking for a raise. They were actively seeking a company with a different DNA.
A different DNA. That's powerful phrasing. It speaks to culture, not just cash. Can you tell us more about that quote on Danish ignorance?
Yeah, the interviewees felt that because Denmark has this strong social welfare state, a lot of domestic companies operate under a kind of self-congratulatory assumption, this Danish ignorance.
The idea that we've already solved equality here.
Exactly. They believe the problem must lie elsewhere, or it's minor. And this contrasts with the perception of MNCs, which, because of their global diversity initiatives, are often seen as being a step ahead on issues like pay equity.
So the decision is this perfect mix of financial gain and a search for cultural integrity. But we know women aren't just, purely rational economic actors. What happens when other factors come into play?
This is where we get to the boundary conditions, the complexities that change the main finding. We have to ask, when would a woman, even after experiencing discrimination, choose to stay domestic?
Okay, so let's start with boundary condition A, hypothesis 2. This is the draw of the domestic leader, which actually weakens the flight to MNCs.
Right. This condition found that the flight response to MNCs is actually weaker in labor markets, where the domestic firms are the productivity leaders.
They measured this with total factor productivity, or TFP. For our listeners who aren't economists, how should we think about that?
Just think of TFP as a measure of efficiency. It basically identifies the best in class, the most innovative firms in that sector or region.
So if the leading edge companies in your region are domestic,
the women are less likely to leave the domestic sector entirely, even if they've faced discrimination.
But why? Why would a woman tolerate that? What's the trade-off?
It's a conscious choice. They're prioritizing significant non-wage benefits that leading domestic firms can offer.
Like what?
Things the MNC subsidiary often can't match. superior local reputation, really unique cutting-edge learning opportunities, or just the prestige and career network that comes from working on the magic flavor team. As one interviewee said, it's much more fun to work on the leading team.
It just shows women are weighing pay fairness against career stability and unique growth potential.
It does. It shows the complexity.
Okay, now let's look at the opposite. Boundary condition B, the female signal. This one strengthens the effect.
This is hypothesis 3. The effect of discrimination driving women toward MNCs is stronger when those specific foreign MNCs have a higher share of women in their management teams than the local domestic firms.
So seeing women in leadership at the foreign firm acts like a turbo boost. It validates their choice.
Absolutely. It's a powerful, observable, and very concrete signal. Women who experience GWD are hyper alert to cues about fairness. They infer that seeing female managers means this is an employer that is truly willing to deviate from those male-dominated local norms.
It's proof of that different DNA they're looking for.
This is the proof, yeah.
The qualitative data here is just so good at translating that. Tell us the quote about the interview panel.
It's a very visceral example. A scientist at a pharmaceutical firm shared her past experience. She said, seeing a potential interview panel with 9 men and 1 woman in the room, that tells me something about the work group and the group dynamics. It makes me careful.
Wow. That imbalance is an immediate red flag.
It is. It activates all the concerns about discrimination they faced before. And conversely, seeing more female representation at an MNC acts as a huge green light, confirming their belief that this foreign employer will be different.
So when we zoom out, what does all this mean? This research really reframes how we should view women in the labor market.
It shifts the narrative completely. It treats women not as passive victims of the wage gap, but as active, strategic decision makers. They adjust their labor supply based on measured disadvantages.
They're turning the MNC's traditional drawback, its foreignness, into a calculated career advantage.
Yes. They're seeking out employers who will pay them a fair wage, precisely because those employers operate outside the local system of bias.
And this has some really significant actionable implications for MNCs. If they understand this mechanism, how can they leverage it?
Well, the research suggests 3 clear strategic pathways. First, MNC should actively and frankly loudly promote their host country policies that are favorable to female employees.
So it's not just an HR initiative, it's a recruiting tool.
It's a competitive recruiting tool. It targets that growing pool of highly qualified candidates who are actively looking for an exit from discriminatory firms.
Okay, what's the second one?
Second, MNCs need to conduct rigorous HR analytics, like the decomposition method in this study, not just to prove they're fair internally, but to identify other groups that are being neglected by local norms.
So this isn't just about gender.
It could be about ethnicity or age or regional background. It's about finding any pool of undervalued human capital they could attract strategically.
And finally, the role of transparency laws, like the one in Denmark. It seems counterintuitive, but MNCs should actually support them.
They absolutely should. MNCs benefit hugely from supporting pay disclosure policies. Transparency is the catalyst. It makes the discrimination observable to the talent pool. The moment a woman confirms she's underpaid, the MNC gets this window of opportunity to attract her.
That is just a phenomenal deep dive. It shows how a major social issue translates directly into individual career choices and corporate strategy. It means that painful experience of realizing you're underpaid doesn't just end with an exit.
Right.
It redirects your entire career path in a way that benefits you, the employee, and gives the foreign employer access to top, undervalued talent.
And that leads to a final, I think, provocative thought for you to consider. The research observed that a woman's preferences for an employer, they aren't static. They called it an evolving process, shaped by lived experience. So if you, the listener, or maybe someone you know, has experienced gender wage discrimination, how long did it take for that emotional reaction, that search for a company with a different DNA, to fundamentally reshape your entire definition of what a good employer, domestic or foreign, should look like for the rest of your career?
Powerful question. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.
We'll catch you next time.